Hi everyone. First of all, thank you for attending this webinar today. This webinar is titled Agents Becoming Carbon Neutral, All You Need to Know. And I'm delighted to say I'm joined by James Pointer from Carbon Neutral Britain. So James, do you want to give you a quick introduction of yourself, if that'd be great?
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Yeah, and hello, everyone. So, yeah, I'm James. I'm director at Carbon Neutral Britain. So, Carbon Neutral Britain, we're an organisation that help companies, as it says on the tin, become carbon neutral. So, we're a team of environmental consultants, perform several functions, but ultimately calculating, offsetting, and certifying businesses to be carbon neutral.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So, and just a quick introduction about myself. So, I'm Mitch. I'm marketing manager at Hive. I've been at Hive for coming up to 3 years now, and Hive is an award-winning cloud-based property management platform and 360 virtual tour platform. So, Hive enables users to create completely paperless property inspection reports, unlimited property inspection reports for the properties they manage, as well as 360 virtual tours. So yeah, we won the EA Masters Best Estate Agent Supplier for 2022. And we feel we're really popular with all of our users that use Hive. And obviously, to tie in with this webinar, we're a completely paperless platform, which obviously I'm sure James will give a big tick on that. So yeah.
Seem to be carbon neutral as well, I'm pleased to add.
Yes, also we're carbon neutral. So thanks for confirming that as well, James. So yeah, in this webinar today, we'll cover off quite a few things. We've just done our introductions. We'll get James's expertise basically on what is carbon neutral, why is it so important. He'll give a brief outline of some statistics as well, especially from the estate agents type of area. The impact on climate change, the best ways on how agents could potentially offset your carbon footprint, how it's assessed. So obviously, Hive is carbon neutral, and James will run through how that was assessed for us as well, and some hints and tips on reducing your carbon footprint and the cost of that. So yeah, so let's get started on that. So obviously, James, I've got all of James's contact details here if you want to get in touch with James at the end after this webinar. So yeah, so carbon neutral Britain. So to start with, James, what is carbon neutral Britain, and how does it work basically?
How does it work? Yeah, thank you, Mitch. Yeah, so Carbon Neutral Britain, as I said, we're a team of environmental consultants. So we came together really to help, in particular, SMEs do their part for climate change. So probably 5 years ago, it would be quite common for big businesses to do their part, calculate their carbon footprints, reduce and carbon offset, but not so much the smaller businesses. So big companies will have their in-house consultants and ESG teams who can do that function for them, and there's this real sort of big gap in the market for smaller businesses who don't necessarily have the expertise to do that themselves. And that's where we fit in. So we have quite a lot of larger clients for offsetting, but really our core focus is to help smaller businesses calculate, offset, and then certify as a carbon neutral business.
Brilliant. So how so in your experience, James, so how many obviously we work with a lot of estate agents. I've been speaking to quite a few estate agents in the last few months, and it was quite interesting actually, because one of the agents I spoke to, they actually said to me they want to start working more with more carbon neutral businesses, and obviously touching on there, you help drive that or accelerate that process and help more businesses become carbon neutral.
Exactly right. Yeah, I think within the real estate industry, there's a really big move to doing that and being carbon neutral. There's lots of organisations. So we work with over 100 independent estate agencies who are pleased to say they're carbon neutral, as well as several large chains as well that have or very close to becoming carbon neutral across all of their branches as well. So it's a really big move within the sector to be carbon neutral as well. And as you said, what is carbon neutral? That's probably a good place to start to
Yeah,
explain.
yes, exactly. Yeah, that's my next question. So, yeah, what is carbon neutral? How do you get to carbon neutral, basically?
Of course. So the process of being carbon neutral essentially is obviously calculating your carbon footprint. That's the most important, sort of the first step in the process. And then
Yeah,
being neutral, in effect, you are neutralizing the emissions
yeah,
that you produced as a business. So you're carbon offsetting those emissions. So essentially investing in projects then reverse the emissions that you've produced to
yeah,
achieve carbon neutral status. And a question a lot of you might be asking is, you hear in the news carbon neutral, net zero. What's the difference? So carbon neutral is something that businesses can achieve now. You can measure your carbon footprint and you can
yeah,
offset your carbon footprint and be carbon neutral straight away and make an impact on climate change now. What net zero essentially is, and the true definition of net zero means you have no emissions at all. So you get to a
yeah,
point where in the case of an estate agency, your branch is on renewable energy. All of your agents are traveling in electric vehicles.
yeah,
You produce little to no waste, or it's within a closed loop cycle, and everything that you do has the minimal to no impact at all.
yeah,
So that's why you might hear a lot of companies where they say they have a net zero target. So they might want to be net zero in 2030, 2040, or
yeah,
2050. So it's really an ambition to be net zero, whereas carbon neutral is something that's achievable now
yeah,
for businesses. So it's really a kind of balance between the two, between kind of measuring and reducing to sort of get to
yeah,
that net zero in the future versus
yeah.
being carbon neutral now.
Perfect. And I'm guessing there's probably quite a few estate agents on this webinar now thinking, well, they might not create much greenhouse gases as such, but when you think about it, the amount of property visits that agents do or um, viewings at properties where it needs a lot of travelling, not just from the members of staff, but also the buyers or sellers or actually travelling to the property as well.
Yeah.
In your opinion, James, what when agents contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, what would those be typically?
Yeah, you spot on it. Yeah, it's the business travel is what it's defined as
Yeah,
via the corporate standards and the measurements. So, compared to another office, you might have just a standard office with 10, 20 desks, a certain size. That will be the same as any other organization. But the real difference for estate agents is the travel that you're doing. So the agents on the road doing viewings, appraisals, and so on. So that's a lot higher than average for a
yeah,
business of a comparable size. And they're the emissions you're releasing into the atmosphere. So, as I said, being carbon neutral, and the reasons for doing that is reversing the impact of your travel and what you're doing, and being proactive is that next step. You're not just measuring your footprint, kind of reducing your footprint. So some of our larger clients are a little bit guilty of this. They have a
yeah,
net zero target for 2040. They'll measure and reduce their footprint each year, but the reality from an environmental perspective is they're going to do 20 years worth of damage to the planet whilst they get to
yes,
net zero,
yeah,
whereas offsetting means you're making a difference to climate change now when it's the
yes,
most important.
yeah. I suppose that's the key word. Really. It's just defining the difference between getting to net zero and actually offsetting, and obviously, like I said, the offsetting gets you there quicker. So, I
Yeah.
suppose, what, in your opinion, James, why is it important to be carbon neutral? So, before coming on to how it's assessed and everything like that, so why do you think it's important to be carbon neutral?
Yeah, good question. I think a lot of our clients look to become carbon neutral probably for three reasons. So the first one, as I said, is that obviously the environmental one. So
Yeah,
measuring and reducing is important, but from an environmental perspective, and all the discussions in COP last year are really about accelerating change now is the most important for climate change. So rather than
yeah,
kind of slowly progressing and making a difference by offsetting, you're doing something about it right now. So the next
yeah,
5 years are the most important, and that's a really proactive approach for businesses to take, particularly small businesses, because the offsetting, which I'll run through later, is pretty inexpensive. That there's almost no reason not to play your part from an
yeah,
environmental perspective. And then the other sort of two reasons, we find a lot of businesses, want to be carbon neutral. And again, a really obvious one is promoting what you've done. So being carbon neutral is a real big point of difference within the estate agency market. It is quite competitive, trying to have points of difference for your business, and it really does engage with your clients, particularly those that are environmentally friendly. We had a discussion with a branch in Bristol, and they were saying, particularly within their area, a lot of their customers are a lot younger and quite environmentally engaged within that area. So they really wanted to do their part to sort of promote that. It also kind of shows the ethics of the business as well. So it's a positive to promote externally. And then also internally, it's a good way to engage staff as well. So we have a lot of companies be carbon neutral to attract talent. And if you're a eco-minded individual, you had 2 companies you could work for, one's carbon neutral, you certainly choose that one as well. And then sorry, Mitch, you can say?
No, I was just saying that exactly touches on the point I made earlier about how it's starting to come into more conversations now, especially for estate agents, where not only from a staff point of view, but also it's good for promoting the estate agent, trying to win more business as well.
Exactly right. No, you're spot on. And what I was going to say, the kind of the third reason, which probably doesn't quite apply as much to this sector, is it's increasingly requested policy of businesses. So we have lots of clients who are manufacturers or suppliers to other businesses, and it's requested of them to have a carbon emissions and policy and to account for it. So as an example, if you're a supplier of any governmental agency, it's now a policy procurement notice, a requirement for businesses to have assessed their carbon footprint and have a plan in place. So
nice.
Probably not as applicable to estate agents. A lot of your business will be business B2C, business to customer, but it's certainly an increasingly requested policy, and in terms of expansion, investment, and so on, something to consider.
Before we come on to this slide that I've got now, I'm just going to jump to an early slide, because one of the questions I've actually got is, what is the impact on climate change at the moment that you're kind of seeing? Because obviously people say about obviously global. There's a funny quote by Trump a few years ago about global warming is actually a good thing, but obviously it isn't. So what is the impact on climate change?
What are businesses' impact on climate change? Well, businesses account for the largest carbon footprint in the UK, and a lot of people have this perception it's just big business that play the part, but it's actually about a 50-50 split. Small businesses have a significant part to playing in climate change. So everything we do, obviously our travel, our vehicles, our energy, our waste, all contribute greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which accelerates climate change. So it's really about measuring, reducing, and offsetting that to make a difference before it's too late.
Perfect. So my next question would be, I suppose, is how is it assessed? So if an agent wanted to get involved with you guys or learn more about becoming carbon neutral, how is it assessed? How do you offset it, and how is it certified?
Good question. So as you can see on the slide there's really 3 steps to being carbon neutral as a business. Step 1 is the calculating part, which I'll run through in a second, and it's quite regulated. There's these set corporate standards for calculating emissions, so that's kind of the first step in the process. Once we know your footprint, and it's done on an annual basis, you then carbon offset. And just like calculating, there's these set standards for offsetting as well to reverse your impact. And then step 3, certification, so becoming certified as a carbon neutral business, but not just the certification, really promoting what you've done. So by offsetting, you're supporting a range of projects around the world, so you can show the positive impact you've made, exactly what these projects have done, which is always good to promote from a sort of marketing and comms perspective.
Brilliant. Perfect. So step 1, like you said, is the calculate and reduce. So that's the first step. So is it easy for an agent to calculate their carbon footprint at the moment?
Well, we would hope so. It's quite a straightforward process. As you can see there's 2 corporate standards for calculating emissions. So it's called ISO 14064 and the GHG emissions, so greenhouse gas emissions protocol accounting standards. And those 2 standards are used on every level. So on a national level, the UK government use it. We want to be net zero 2050 as a country, so they use that, as do all governmental agencies. It's used in something called mandatory reporting. So really large companies with really large carbon footprints already have to do this. So legally, they have to report and in some cases offset their emissions as well. And then below that, what SMEs are doing is called voluntary reporting and offsetting. So you're choosing to calculate and offset your emissions, but you're calculating through the same corporate standards as government agencies and listed companies as well. So that's the function that we perform. We calculate via those corporate standards as environmental consultants. And the importance of that is, well, first of all, just doing the right thing and correctly assessing your emissions, but really just being accurate and transparent with your claims. So when we calculate your footprints, we produce a carbon emissions report. It shows how we've calculated your emissions via the corporate standards. So there is no real argument in your carbon neutral claims. So any skeptical customers questioning your carbon neutral status, you can show how it's being calculated the correct way with these standards.
Yeah, perfect. So that's step one on how to calculate and reduce. Then step two is probably the key step, really, is actually getting it offset, because without achieving this, then obviously it's about getting certified as well, which is step three. But step two, offsetting, if you can provide a bit more detail about that. I suppose it's not a case of, I've recycled a can of Pepsi. Does that mean I can drive around in my diesel car now? I assume it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, exactly right. So that first step would calculate, and it's done on an annual basis. I didn't mention. So what we would do, we don't sort of estimate future emissions. We have to look at a business's actual data. So what did you do in the last year? That's your calculated carbon footprint as done for the year, and that will be things like your travel, as we mentioned, your energy usage, your waste, as you just mentioned, commuting, perhaps deliveries, and other activities in the business kind of done for the year. We produce that figure, and it's measured in tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. That's that TCO2e you might hear or read about in the media, and then that's the exact figure that has to be offset. And as you said, Mitch, how it works in terms of standards, just as regulators calculating. So what offsetting essentially is they are projects all around the world that prevent or absorb CO2 emissions, and how they're funded are by directly selling the reductions that they made. So when you buy a 1 ton carbon offset, there's no middleman. It goes directly to that project that's generated that 1 ton in reduction. And in terms of standards, so there's a few different types. So the main corporate standard that's used and we use is called United Nations Certified Emission Reductions. So what the UN essentially do is they regulate the projects themselves. So if it was a reforestation project in the Amazon or a wind farm in Asia, that they would help set it up. They would then audit and verify that project, and then they'd help facilitate selling that offset on various carbon markets and registries around the world. So technically, at this corporate level, it's a commodity, so it's traded and used globally by businesses, and predominantly by big businesses who legally have to offset via verified projects around the world. And then the other two sort of large standards that are out there as well, as you can see, is called the Verra standard and the Gold standard. So they're also large multinational NGOs that perform the same function as well. So they regulate the projects and then help facilitate selling these offsets for businesses to reverse their impact.
Perfect. With in a state agency, what are you finding? Obviously, you've listed out these standards here. I know some of them are mainly for the larger businesses, but with like your standard estate agent, what kind of certification would they typically get, or what standard will they get?
Through our services, we would use those standards. So the important part in being carbon neutral is being accurate and transparent. So you, as a business, and your stakeholders and customers know you've done the right thing. You've calculated your footprint via the corporate standards, and then you've also offset your footprint via the corporate standards as well. So these standards ensure when you say you've offset 10 tons or 100 tons for the business, that has occurred, and the funding has gone directly to those projects compared to other environmental initiatives you might get. So there are charities where you can pay to plant trees, which is obviously a positive, and indirectly will eventually offset emissions, but slightly different in the way that it's verified.
Yeah, I've seen that quite a lot lately, where a lot of companies have been like planting trees, for example. I think I've seen somewhere where an agent was, for every property sold, they'll plant some trees, for example. So there is quite a few initiatives out there that agents could take part in. I'm just going to find my next question I've got for you then, James, is so if I was an agent, I wanted to measure my carbon footprint, look to offset it. What is the cost of that? What is the typical cost to offset the carbon footprint? While James is discussing that, there is some case studies that that are on your screen now, and I'll share those as well. So
thank you, Mitch. So less than you would think is the short answer. So as I said, we've dealt with well over 100 independent state agency branches and numerous other chains, and what we found is the average carbon footprint of one branch, one estate agency, is around 50 tons of carbon dioxide. So that's all of the emissions for the year from your site, your offices, your travel, and so on as well, which may or may not sound like a lot. 50 tons is metric tons. That's the measurement that's done, but the actual cost itself to offset is quite minimal. So carbon offsetting varies depending on the project, but is somewhere between sort of £6 to £12 per ton to carbon offset. So you're looking at as a business, a couple of £100 to offset your carbon footprint for the year. So it really is quite minimal to reverse your impact as a business. You're not a huge logistics company or a large manufacturer, so it really is looking at your vehicles is kind of your largest footprint and reversing the impact of that.
So for a bit of advice for agents, I suppose, what are your main tips for agents to reduce footprint? Would you say it's just more for the vehicles, or is it paper use in the office, or what would your main top tips be?
Of course, definitely vehicles is the largest one. So of that 50 tons, if that was just a case study, just an example for an estate agency, probably 30 to 40 tons of that will be from your travel. So that's your agents traveling to site visits and so on. There's also commuting is part of that as well. So staff traveling to work as a footprint that contributes to that as well. Perhaps, again, as a simple example, maybe 10 tons of that might be your office, so your energy usage, your mains gas usage from your office will have a carbon footprint. And that remaining 10 tons will be other kind of smaller areas. So things like your waste, your deliveries, your water consumption and things like that as well. So really identifying your vehicle travel and trying to understandably reduce that as much as possible. Obviously, virtual viewings is a big step and something you can do there as well, which will help. But then also looking at your vehicles and the emissions of them as well.
You just touched upon there about virtual viewing. So obviously when COVID came about, before COVID, it was almost standard that every property had viewings in person, where literally they'd have a host of people travel to the property. You'd have members of staff going to the property as well to do those viewings. But now it's quite a standard practice now after COVID, because obviously with the isolation, the virtual viewings kind of boomed. On Inventory Hive, you can create virtual tours just like the example on the screen. So what it helps agents do is, say if there was 50 people interested in viewing a property, you could almost send them a virtual tour or virtual viewing just like the one on the screen, but then you could almost like narrow down that short list to say 5 people. So that the impact it has there on being carbon neutral means there's 45 people not traveling to the property now for that viewing, and it also saves the travel on that member of staff going to and through the property quite a few times as well. So virtual viewings are probably one of the key steps to help reduce your carbon footprint. Would you agree with that? That's one of your tips,
100%. Absolutely. That's the biggest factor. So lovely videos like that. It makes things a lot easier for customers to get what they need without all of the travel.
And the other thing on Inventory Hive as well you can do is you can create paperless inspection reports, and you touched upon as well, James, where well, typically an inventory report created an inventory hive can be 60, 70, 80 pages long with all the photos and all the descriptions, just like the one on the screen. But because we're a completely paperless platform, obviously that helps agents contribute to their offset as well and reduce the amount of carbon footprint they're creating as well. A letting agent might, for example, be creating maybe 20 to 30 reports a week, and if they're 70 to 80 pages long, then I dread to think how much paper that's been used.
Yeah, and then the assessment of the footprint of that's quite a lot, because you've obviously got to order the paper. There's the delivery of the paper to your site,
Yeah,
the delivery of the ink, printing, and then the end waste. So there's quite a long journey
yeah,
in terms of emissions, not just
yeah,
the printing itself, but getting the paper and then the
yeah.
end.
You made a good point there. It's almost like the hidden, I wouldn't say the hidden cost, but the hidden carbon footprint, like ordering that paper in, like you just said. I didn't really think about that until you mentioned
Yeah,
it. So that is a really good point. So yeah,
yeah, we did. Absolutely. We deal with a lot of printing companies, and it's
yeah,
quite significant the amount of pallets of paper that are delivered for
yeah.
those sort of things.
So when an estate agent gets certified as being a carbon neutral business, what would they typically get? So obviously I've got a media pack on my screen. Would they get this and a logo, and they can obviously promote that they're carbon neutral for their business?
Yeah, absolutely. So the final step, yeah, is really certification and promoting it. So once we've calculated your emissions via the corporate standards, you've offset your emissions, who said it's a couple £100 typically via the corporate standards, you are then a carbon neutral business. So what we provide is carbon neutral certification, obviously, carbon
Yeah,
offset certification. So that's evidence your 50 tons or whatever your footprint is has been offset via the corporate standards. We provide a carbon neutral badge or license to use. You can see there on the screen. So a lot of
yeah,
our state agency clients use that within their websites, their
yeah,
promotional materials, on their cars as well, to
yeah,
show that you're
yeah.
doing
Of
your
course,
part
yeah. That's a great idea.
as an organization. And then also really important from a marketing perspective is a media pack of the project. So when we offset, the projects do vary that we support throughout the year, but when we do offset for a particular business, we'll know which projects they've supported. So you'll get photos, information, content on those projects. It's cool, as you can see, they're UN SDGs as well. So these projects have to have a secondary benefit as well to the UN standards. So it's not just a wind farm. That wind farm has to have a
Yeah,
positive impact on education and jobs, or biodiversity and wildlife if it's a nature-based project.
yeah,
So businesses will get that content, so they'll know exactly what they supported. They'll have content they can use, and they'll have an understanding of the other benefits they've had by supporting that project as well.
perfect. Yeah. So yeah, like I said, like this slide here, it's time to make a difference. I think during COVID, I spent a lot of time watching Netflix and documentaries about, especially ones with David Attenborough in, and it really does hit home um, how much climate change is happening right now, and it really is an eye opener that we need to act now, and hopefully, carbon neutral Britain will help accelerate that. You're there to educate people and help estate agents become carbon neutral, and if we can transfer that across the world, and hopefully we can achieve that and slow down the carbon footprint that we're creating. So
Absolutely.
if that pretty much concludes today's webinar. Before I get some details from James, like I said, if you want to get in touch with Inventory Hive, just have a look on our website. We offer a 30-day free trial where you can create paperless inspection reports and 360 virtual tours. Give us a call, go on the website, sign up for your free trial. But if you want to get in touch with James, if you want to, what's the best way to get in contact with you, James, if people are, or estate agents are looking to become carbon neutral?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the website's carbonneutralbritain.org if you'd like to visit, or you can drop us an email at business@carbonneutralbritain.org for some more information. So as I said, the costs are quite minimal.
Yeah,
The process itself will take around a month, I would say,
yeah.
from calculating to offsetting and certification. So there is no excuse. Reach out and
Yeah,
have a chat with us. We'd love to help.
Yeah, and you touched upon at the very start where it's almost booming now with the amount of estate agents getting in touch with you. So I think it's a real good opportunity for agents to become carbon neutral. So brilliant. Thanks for your time, James. I really appreciate it. I hope everyone enjoyed today's webinar and found it really informative. If you have any questions about the webinar, just get in touch with info@inventoryhive.co.uk, and I can also pass on any questions to James as well. Again, thanks for everyone's time today. James, again, you've been absolutely brilliant. Thanks for your amazing contribution and great insight on how carbon neutral Britain works. And let's get on the bandwagon and make some change. So again, thanks for everyone's time today, and any questions, just get in touch. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.